What we want to do then is really finish off the final part of this, thinking about the emergence of trauma material, i.e., what is in the, what do you see, what do you notice, and those strategies for maintaining safety. A lot of these aren't going to be new to you, but it's important that we go over them. Okay, if we then think about embodiment, what we're thinking about is really grounding. So, grounding through rhythm and movement. We need to use predictability. Those activities need to be things like rocking and clapping. So, it's all about the movement. We're thinking about states of arousal, and we want to stabilize those states of arousal, whether, as Tara said, whether it's in sympathetic or dorsal, we need to stabilize the states of arousal. We're considering those sensory boundaries, and what sensory input the child is having. Here we can think about weighted blankets. Remember, with weighted blankets, there is a process for that. You need to think about the child's weight, and the blanket needs to reflect that. So make sure that you understand how weighted blankets are used, and what should be and shouldn't be used in those. But we can think about cushions, we can think about soft lighting. All of these really are to reduce the overwhelm. Or it may be that we have to just increase something in order to, if a child has been overwhelmed, and we need to decrease, but if they've been underwhelmed, then we need to activate a little bit. So both ways, think about those. Then we think about our attunement. You know, our bread and butter, we maintain calmness, we think about breathing, we think about posture, so that the child's nervous system can be co-regulated by our nervous system. We're thinking about the kind of autonomic nervous system here in polyvagal theory. And then we want to return to neutral. What we mean by that is that there's that back and forth, back and forth. We want to stretch their window of tolerance. We don't want to get stuck in the trauma material. And that might mean that we have to be a little bit more structured, a little bit more directive, in order to re-establish safety.
And it might be that you need to put that in at the beginning of the end in terms of ritual.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And then we think about projection. So we're thinking about the containment through the objects. We do want to encourage the child to externalize their feelings, their experiences onto the kind of the play materials, but it has to be in a safe way, because this is all about containment of that. We're thinking about distancing techniques. So if the child is again overwhelmed, underwhelmed, we can speak through the objects. And if we think about the PTDM, really we're thinking about actively utilizing quadrant 1 here, and maybe thinking about a quadrant 4 position. But we want to be able to distance the child from their projection if we're noticing it's becoming very, very overwhelming or underwhelming for them, whether it's a sympathetic or dorsal position. We want the child, generally speaking, to take the lead and take control of the narrative pace. However, it may be that we need to actually hold that a bit differently, and we need to just very gently guide them. But in the guidance, we're not making interpretations. It's just that if we go back to what Tara said, which is that looping and that stuckness, and we think about very static play, which has a real kind a felt sense of realness about it, then we may well have to kind of almost grab hold of that narrative and move it in a slightly different direction. Then what we want to do for ourselves is we want to try and offer that neutrality. So no judgment, all of Carl Rogers' core conditions there we're thinking about, and we're staying with the symbolic material rather than expecting and demanding an exploration and an explanation from the child.
And sometimes that might be quite hard because what they are projecting might be really hard to hold.
Yes, yes. And then we think about role. So we need that. This is about role flexibility. We want to be through the trauma lens, as we see it is rigid and stuck. We want to be switching roles, and we want to be more flexible, because we don't want the child to become overwhelmed in those roles. We're thinking about safe roles first. So if the child is putting you into a particular role, and they really want you to, in a sense, be the perpetrator, then we want to be thinking about how can we move it more into a caretaking helper role. That
Mhm.
can be hard,
Mhm.
but this is where we start to become a little bit more directive, a little bit more structured in terms of our responses and reflections. We want, as Tara said, we want rituals, we want clear beginnings and clear endings. This is where it starts, this is where it ends. So that's very, very important. And it's something about connecting in those moments as well. Let's start with connection and let's end with connection. And ensuring that there is a de-rolling, that we explicitly step out of the roles. One thing we would say that's very important is that this happens absolutely at the end of sessions, that they must transition out of the space as them,
Mhm.
not in the role. And it may be that you have to put things in place towards the end a little bit more, give a little bit more time for that, but that's very important.
Mm. Yeah. And if there is a child who's stuck in role, who does this sort of looping, then that is why we would argue that the rituals are hugely, really, really important. So you're able to contain that for them before they leave.
Absolutely.
So just to sort of sum up, really, regardless of the stages, this is just repeating everything that we've said, but we would say that we really want to try and keep our clients within that window of tolerance and stretch it. So we are very, very attuned to their arousal levels, where they're at, whether they're moving from sympathetic to dorsal and back again. We will be using lots of grounding through the EPR lens. That will very much, we're thinking about the body. We're thinking about whether there's sensory anchors that are needed. We're thinking about how they feel in space. We've got interoceptive curiosity. And we're also thinking about containing. So through an EPR model, it's all about containment. And so it might be, as we've said, give endings to stories, have a curiosity, close the narratives. It might be that we do tidy the play space, which again is something which is not necessarily how we're taught, but that could be a ritual. Um, Respect the child's pace. We've talked about that. Don't force the story forward, but you might need to stretch it. So
Mm.
it's that gentle knowing of when is it time for you to actually help them move through something which feels too frightening or unknown, versus just staying comfortably in a comfortable space, and so the therapy doesn't move forward. And then reconnect at the end of sessions to reestablish safety. In a model that we teach on other courses and that we're developing, we would also say that for children with relational trauma, it might be that there is a reunion at this point with the caregiver. So you're not actually re-establishing safety with self. I am Tara, you are Joe, but also, and here is mum. So it might be that that's something which also needs to be integrated to re-establish that felt sense of safety. So pacing the therapeutic process. We've said this, match their stage. If the child has regressed to embodiment, we need to go there. We need to be thinking about what they need in this regress stage. And as I said before, it might be that you are dancing from different stages. We know this with regression. So you need to move along with that. Look for signs of saturation. So is it that you actually need to intentionally support regulation? And if we're co-regulating through this process, then that's less likely to be needed. But I mean, of course it happens. You do get children who suddenly flip into overwhelm. And so I think what we're saying through this lens is don't be worried about pausing, noticing what's happening in their body, what their body might need, so that then they can re-enter in a playful way. And just allow the back and forth between stages, as we've said. But this is the beauty of the kind of work we do, is that our clients have the opportunity to move back and forth through different stages and different wounds. That's kind of why we do what we do, right?